5, and 6.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Petty.
Move that we approve the minutes for the January 28th, 29th, 30th, February 4th, 5th, and 6th.
I have a motion, I have a second. Second by Senator Fagg. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll have a briefing by staff on HB 2007 as amended, and we'll have Shirley Morrow, Director of Kansas Legislative Research Department. Shirley, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. Actually, I'm going to let Dylan do the overview of where we're at right now with HB 2007. One of the things we talked about was we have new people on the committee that have never been on a budget committee before. Plus, we have a whole new process with a whole new document that you've never seen before. So I thought before you got into reviewing budgets, you have this huge notebook in front of you, which are what we're calling now the budget summaries, not the budget. Yeah. I'm like, what did we used to call it? Budget analyst. So anyway, what I thought I'd do is if you'd open your notebooks to page 99, I will briefly go over what these budget summaries look like, what's in them, and how to read them because they are much different. And that way when you start your budget hearings, you'll have a better idea of when the analysts come up to talk to you, what it is they're talking about and how to actually analyze the information that you have in front of you. So on page 99, you'll see it's the Board of Regents. And again, I know some of you have been on this committee for many years or on the House side in House appropriations, but I am going to go through a lot of the basics just because, like I said, some people haven't been on a budget committee. So on the first page, you have a budget summary. It shows 2024 actuals, the current year revised estimate for the agency for 2025. You'll have a legislative budget committee for 25, an agency request for 26, and then a budget summary from the committee for 26. Now, these numbers will show you kind of the start of the budget as of when the budget committee finished their work at the end of the year. So these are the numbers from the legislative budget committee that were set before session started. And as you get into the document, we will take that starting point and then you will see everything that the House did. So these are the starting points. We break everything into state operations and capital improvements. State operations, again, just for your information, salaries and wages. You want to make sure you remember that salaries and wages is not only what the employees get paid, but it's retirement, insurance, health insurance, unemployment, all the different things that go with the salaries. Contractual services are anything that you have payments for services, communications, travel, utilities, consulting services, printing, things like that. Commodities are consumables, supplies, parts, things like that. Capital outlay, a lot of times when you see the word capital, you think capital improvements. This is not capital improvements, this is capital outlay. These are expenditures that have a life over 1 year. Think of these as what I call hard goods, office equipment, machinery, furniture, vehicles, things like that. And then you'll see right below that, there is aid to local units. And you'll notice on that front page, and I'm not going to get into the budget a lot because I'm going to let Brianna do that, but you'll notice there's quite a large portion of the Board of Regents budget that is aid to locals. Aid to local units is pass-through money from the agency to other entities that, like school districts, cities, anything that has a taxing authority, could be state or federal. So that is money that's not part of the agency's operating account. And in addition to that, you have something called other assistance. That is pass-through money that goes to individuals. When I had higher education, I always talked about scholarship money. You'll have scholarship money. It could be benefits, unemployment, property tax relief payments, tuition grants. It's anything that goes to an individual from a state agency. So that's what you'll find in other assistance. And then you have the capital budget. We did this a little bit differently this year, so I just want to make note. We include debt service principal and interest with the capital budget and debt together. Before, it used to be broken out. Principal was in one area and interest was in another area. We're putting it all together as debt in with capital improvements because for the most part, other than capers and maybe a couple other things, most of the debt is capital improvements because we're building buildings. So that's just a brief synopsis of the first page. On the second page, we get into the numbers. And again, I'm not going to get into the budget at all. I just want to talk about how we put these tables together and how to read the tables. So that figure 3, you'll see we're starting off with 24 actuals to give you an idea of actual expenditures for an agency. Then you have 2025 approved. That is what the legislature approved in last session. Those are the numbers you left last session with for this agency. And then 2025 agency is what they have revised their estimate for expenditures for the current year. Then you have the percent change, but from actuals to what the agency is requesting and the change from what was approved. So you're taking those two columns of the agencies approved and comparing them to two different numbers. So figure 4 is the summary, and this is where we're going to start analyzing the changes from what the Legislative Budget Committee did. So you'll notice up at the top, we start with the approved numbers. So this is what happened last year with Senate Bill 28 and House Bill 2551. So that's your budget bill and your omnibus bill. So that's the starting point. There's some reappropriations in there that we'll talk about. And then the agencies for the budget year, or for the current year, have supplemental requests. And then you have all these other changes. Now, you'll notice that each one of these line items have a number associated with them. So if you go right below this table, you'll see the description of every one of these numbers. So as you look through the table, if you have a question, just follow the next 2 or 3 pages and you'll see there is a very good explanation of what that line item is referring to. Now, I will state, and again, I don't want to get into too much of the budget analysis, but one thing I'll notice is, and this has been one of the confusing aspects of these budget documents, because we're not comparing to the governor's recommendation, we're comparing to a pre-authorized budget from the interim committee. You'll notice that in these other changes, there's a lot of negative numbers. For the Board of Regents, and again, if you read the descriptions of these are deletes from this agency's budget, but it's really not a delete because these are transfers to the universities and the community and tech colleges. So it's a delete, but it's really just money that they moved from their budget to the other budgets from last year's approved numbers. And again, the write-up will explain those. And then the other thing I'll just briefly note is if you turn to page 105, that will be the budget year. You have the same tables. We have the 25 agency, which is what their revised request is. We have what was approved from 25 from last year's budget, and then what the agency is requesting for 26. And then again, you're starting out looking at the 25 budget from last year's appropriations bills, and then you're seeing all the enhancements for the Board of Regents, enhancements from the state universities, and the two-year colleges, and then at the very bottom and into the next page, you're seeing any changes that were made. And again, you have to kind of read the description because some of these negative numbers aren't necessarily a deletion from a budget, but they are the fact that the agency isn't requesting this money that was in the 25 budget. They're not requesting it in the 26 budget. So it's not in the budget, therefore it looks like a deletion. And that's really confusing, but that's why I wanted to kind of explain this. And same thing, these all have numbers associated, and you have descriptions after the table for all of those different line items. At the end on page 114, this is an agency that has capital improvement, so you will see the capital improvement budget. And then the last thing, we had a request for the 10-year table. We haven't had those in the budget for a couple of years, and that's something that's been very popular with you all, to look back for the last 10 years and look at the actuals and compare them to what the agencies are requesting. So we have the 10-year tables in. Depending on which agency you were looking at, you could have fee fund tables, you could have FTEs by program. It's all general information for the different agencies. The analysts have put different tables in to just give you a better idea of some of the information from the agency. And that is a general overview of a budget summary.
Questions for Shirley? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it was page 99 when you started. If I can get back to that. Yes, salaries and wages. That number includes salaries for positions that are not filled, or this is only actual salary or only actual expenditures for salary for this agency?
The salaries are those that the agency have budgeted for. They could be unfilled at the time, but they're either in the process of filling them or expecting to fill them, and they want the money there and available. So it depends agency to agency how they budgeted those salary positions.
But it could be positions that have been vacant for some time, potentially.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Senator Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions around the same thing. If you could flip back to 99, I just want to make sure that I understand this correctly, and then I'll have a similar question on page 100. So the actual for 2024 is what has been approved. That's in the past. The
Actual is actual expenditures,
actual expenditures, right.
because that year is over, so those books are closed.
Very good. Agency FY25 is what the agency it was previously approved and the requested supplementals.
It's the current year revised estimate of what they are asking for the next, when they did the budget, it was 6 months. Now we're down to about 3.
So current year revised estimate for 25.
Correct.
So does that includes any enhancements they're requesting to complete 25?
Supplementals for the current
Supplementals.
year, yes.
Okay, very good. So the Legislative Budget Committee FY25 is what the Legislative Budget Committee has approved tentatively to start the budget with.
That was with our starting process at the beginning of the session.
Okay? And then Agency 26th is their request, and same for Legislative Budget Committee.
Correct.
Okay, flip to 100, if you'll indulge me, Mr. Chairman. I just, again, want to make sure that I'm following the numbers here. So we know what, on page 100, we know what 24 actuals are. 25 approved, is that's what has been approved by the House and sent to the Senate?
No, this was last year.
Okay, so
You'll
this
notice-
was approved
you'll notice
last
this
year.
Top line on figure 4, we talk about 2024 SB 28, which was last year's appropriation bill, and House Bill 2551 was the omnibus bill. So those were approved by the legislature last year, because last year, 2025, was the budget year. So this is the second bite at the apple.
And that's
of
what the
that year.
next one represents, 2025 agency, is their enhancement requests.
It's their revised estimate. They may or may not have enhancements or supplementals.
Okay? So really, to get back to where our starting point is, if we look at the next one, sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm following this correctly.
That's why we're talking about this. This is very
Absolutely.
confusing. This is a new process, a new way to do it.
Definitely is. So when I look at, on page 105, the 2025 agency, so we're starting with their revised estimate? That's what that
And-
is?
Unfortunately, in this figure, we have those two columns reversed. So the approved, again, is, there's an asterisk there. It's approved by the legislature from last year, and then the 2025 agency, that first column is their revised estimate. So they're unfortunately flipped from the last figure.
So their 2025 agency revised estimate is what they're per se asking for with supplementals and everything else.
Correct.
And the 2025 approved was last year's approval.
Correct.
And then the 2026 agency is their ask per se.
Their budget year.
Their budget ask. And then the changes. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me to make sure that I understand how this is working.
Senator Petty.
Thank you. So Shirley, then if we go on to 105, or 106, sorry, and you, in figure 7, that summary of budget requests, and you said that this is deceiving, or you didn't use that word, but because it shows negative, but in fact, this is, this would be original request, but a reduction now of the request?
In essence, on anything that's a negative number, you need to look at the explanation for that line item, because when most,
22 then, let's just take number 22. 2-year
okay.
colleges student success initiative.
If you read the description on that, it's possible that because you're comparing the numbers from what they received, what was approved in 25 to what they're asking for in 26, the negative, most times when we think of a negative, it's money we're taking out of the budget. Technically, this is, they didn't request it this year, but it was in last year's budget. So that's why you just have to think about it a little bit different.
So anything, so I'll just go back to that on page 106. So anything that I see there that's a negative number means that the agency changed their requests from what they had, or, yeah,
It's a different year, so the request is different. So since we're comparing it to the 25 approved numbers, in 26, it's a number that they're not requesting that was in 25. So it's a deletion, but it's just the request is different. And again, it's very specific to each item, so you really need to look at the description.
But the agency themselves made this decrease, made these.
Correct. In those columns for the agency, yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Shirley.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have Dylan Deere, Kansas Legislative Research Department. Dylan? Welcome, committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Record, my name is Adam Muir. I'm the Assistant Director. Shirley provided us a brief overview of the summary, which and of course, we probably ran additional questions. And just reach out to anyone here, anyone else, all of us sitting over in the corner, or if you have questions. I'm just going to talk a little bit about where you are now. So you should have the HB 2007 underneath your folders. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the overview. All right, to kind of give you a little bit of an idea. So if you look at the front page, you can see that the sort of trend line in expenditures in green, that's all federal funds is going from 16.9 billion to 25.5. So that means that over the course of those years, we're going about $8.5 billion increase. If you look at the blue line, okay, that's going from $7 billion to $6 billion, $3.5 billion increase over that period of time, or 50.3%. So it's actually kind of extended all funds number and increased by 50.4%. This is reflected in the current House recommendation. So that's what you're seeing in these numbers, not an agency request, not an LDC. This is what the House is doing. If you turn to page 2, this is just discussing some of the one-time expenditures in this budget. When you turn to page 3, you have the total. So this is showing the 24 actuals, so that's actual revenues and expenditures, 25 agencies, the estimates for 27 to 29. In line 6, you have the special LDC revenue adjustments. So that's $50 million in positive revenue adjustments in that year.
Oh, I thought that was on. And that's $50 million in special LBC revenue adjustments. That is from the Build Kansas one-time suspension. They suspended it for 1 year, and so you're seeing that revenue adjustment. And House Appropriations is showing a positive $32.9 million in revenue adjustments, and that's mostly due to suspension of a program inside of the Board of Regents. And there's a couple other little small things in there. So then you go down in line 14, you see the agency request as the starting point. All right. In line 17 and 18, you first see the HB 2007 LBC, special LBC sort of adjustments. So they deleted 290 million and 1.1 billion. And then the House Appropriations Committee added back 165.3 million in 25 and $194.8 million in 26. So, you're looking at, reductions to the tune of, $130 million in 25 and then about $800 million in 26 from the original agency requests. Now that leaves you in 19, 10.8 billion as an ending balance, 10.6 billion, or as total adjusted expenditures, excuse me, 10.6 billion, 10.8, 11, and 11.2. As those increase in the out years, the only adjustments we're putting in for those are human services caseloads and education. So it's those two adjustments. in that. And then line 22, now you have an ending balance going from 2.1 to 1.5 to 712 to negative 46 and negative 745.1. Now, I would note if you look in line 1, sorry to go back to the beginning, in FY 2029, so at the top right of the corner, top right corner of the table, that's a 0. So despite the fact that you're showing a negative $46 million ending balance, we always show the starting balance as 0 because the state constitutionally is not allowed to carry a negative ending balance. So you can't deficit spend in the state of Kansas. You can spend from your ending balance, but you can't actually spend to when you're in the negative. And so if you look at line 26, and I've talked to you all about this in the past, negative balance about 1.1, negative 640.5, negative 785, negative 785, and that's receipts below expenditures, as you're seeing that run across. None of this takes into account line 24, which is your budget stabilization fund ending balance. So in none of these cases or in none of these scenarios do you ever actually touch the budget stabilization fund. So that's kind of where the House position is in a very macro level going into to begin your deliberation. Of course, you're not locked into any of this. Now it's the Senate's turn to take a crack at it and make what adjustments they wish. I would also note that these profiles are planning documents only. Okay, they're here so that you have some idea that if we imagine a world in which everything was stayed the same, this is where we would be. So we're not anticipating any recessions or any major growth. We're just looking at sort of the regular continuous growth that we have seen. All right, I also wanted to, so there's a bunch of pages in the overview I'm not going to go over. It's just sort of background information. But I think it's really useful you turn to page 10. So starting on page 10 is your function of government overviews. So for each major function of government, you're going to have a little quick overview and with the major changes that are occurring inside that budget. And the way we structured these is they don't care whether it's a House shorthand House adjustment, whether it was an agency adjustment, whether it was a LBC adjustment. This is like what's actually an adjustment from the approved. So it just focuses on what changes you're being confronted with right now. So that's the overview, and I will pause there for questions before moving on to the next document.
Questions? Seeing none, please proceed.
Everything that was old is new again. So we have a new document for you this year that's kind of a sort of reinvention of an old document. So it's this one right here. It's the landscape document you have. And this is the new bill explainer. So I don't know if you remember them or not, but each time we run a bill on the floor, we used to pass out a document that was about 300 pages, and it provided narrative descriptions of what's going on in each one of the agencies. So we're exploring an alternative this year, and the first 4 pages of this bill explainer is just what their current expenditure levels are at. So if you look on this, if you look under education, you look under Board of Regents, FY25, it's 403.2 and 422.9 all funds, and 362 and 444.9. So that's just what their level of expenditures are. And if you turn to page 4 of this document, it's kind of a blow-by-blow of how we have gotten to where we are now. So if you look at the Department of Agriculture, it starts again with the approved. We always use the approved as our starting point. Then it shows like reappropriations and then agency other changes, all right, for FY 2025. And as you move to the right, it starts with the agency request, moves to those LBC 2007 adjustments, and then the House appropriations adjustment. So if you want to know if something's in a bill, one of the best or in an agency, one of the best places to look is inside this bill explainer. Each one of these short titles should correspond to something either in your budget summary, okay, document, or in the budget committee reports, which are posted to our website, and I will send you all the link to. But that's what the budget summary is. It's just so, like, if you want to know whether or not the technical assistance contribution agreement is in, you can see in line 129 that you got $5 million in there in the agency request, you got $5 million in there in the House Bill 2007, and you have $5 million in there under the House appropriations position. So as it comes to you right now, that is in the budget. So if you see it all the way over on the right, you know it's still in. Does that make sense? Or do you have any questions?
Any questions? Doing good, Dylan. Oh, Senator Owens.
I think I just want to make sure that that I understand what you said. If it makes it all the way to the right, it's still there. So let's just take page 5, line 138, sorghum investment program. According to this, the agency had requested $1 million for it in all funds. As introduced, it was not in there, and House Appropriations never added it, so that is no longer in the budget.
So I will say that is true in one moment.
Or
'Cause I thought we put sorghum investment back in.
138.
I see it. So that's the sorghum investment, and that particular line item is definitely out. But I thought we might have funded it from the State Water Plan Fund as an alternative.
Please don't let me pick the one example that's not right. because
Yes.
That'll really mess my brain.
No, so that is out.
Okay, okay.
Why don't I have Luke come on up here? Because I could have sworn there was still money in there for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Luke Drury. I'm a senior fiscal analyst with Kansas Legislative Research Office, or Kansas Legislative Research, and I do work with Ag and Natural Resources budgets. So in particular for the sorghum investment program, Senator, Mr. Chair, to answer the question, the agency's request was from general fund for that. As you can see, as introduced, that was deleted, and there is no general fund in there for that particular program. However, with that being said, it is included in the agency's, it is included in the House appropriations overall through State Water Plan Fund funding. You will notice as part of the agency's request, and Senator, you did choose an item that was a little bit different in the agency's request, that the State Water Plan Fund has a number of traditional lines of appropriation. The agency's request had collapsed those into 5 buckets. There are 5 guiding principles. The House's recommendation broke those back out and included funding for that enhancement, but as opposed to using general fund dollars, they did use State Water Plan Fund dollars. So then you will see that here. That would be included in crop and livestock research. So that would be line 147. That's where you can see that item at.
Yes.
Okay, so then how do I know? Because if I were just to look at this, I would see the sorghum investment program is no longer funded. How do I know without specifically asking you on every single line item, was this reappropriated somewhere else, somehow else?
Mr. Chair, Senator, to answer the question, that documentation would be in the Budget Committee reports where we identify the changes that were made by the Legislative Budget Committee, the House Budget Committees and then the Appropriations Budget Committee. So that would be identified, correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions? Oh, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To follow up on Senator Owens, so on this overview, as I was looking at it, that Mr. Deere gave us, so I see that 4.2 million to the Department of Agriculture for the Center for Sorghum Improvement, Conservation District, Feedlot. How do we know out of that 4.2 million how much went to each of those items? Is that detailed in our notebook?
Mr. Chair, Senator, I have that information. Admittedly, I'm not sure of that. I believe that the specifics are in the Budget Committee report. I'll need to look at that quickly, but I can certainly have an answer to you. Because we do have that information.
Mr. Chair, just a comment. It might be helpful on those items that there would be some type of notation that while it looks like it's zeroed out, it was funded in another area or some type of note to draw our attention to so we don't think that all of the money has been deleted for that area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions?
Yeah, exactly.
Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate those questions. There are a couple areas that are very complex in how they shifted money around. State Water Plan Fund is one of those. Another place that's incredibly complex and that will require a lot of attention to detail is the Economic Development Initiatives Fund, because they reallocated a lot of that spending as well. There's going to be a couple documents which we're going to make available to you, which are these tables. These are our special revenue fund tables, and they provide line-by-line details of how those funding got allocated, and they really do the breakouts, even more than what you see in this bill explainer. So we'll make those available so you can sort of identify those changes. I appreciate that. We'll look into that and how to make that, the idea of tracking that it's still somewhere else in the budget as a possibility. But you did make me remember something else, which I would like to point out. So if you are on page 5, and you look in the very far right-hand side of this table, you see those little arrows, green arrows and red arrows? Okay, that's just sort of a trend line to indicate whether that's an increase in expenditures or a decrease in expenditures. So if, like you see generally, funding is increasing, you can sort of see it that way. And I believe this is a change from 2007 is the way these are structured. All right, so that is the bill explainer. Does anyone else have any questions?
Other questions? Senator Petty.
So Dylan, just along that, it's following up on the same path that was going down before. So you provide these arrows, which is great. But again, so what we heard was that now the sorghum investment program has been moved to the water program, and you said it was under crop and livestock research, and that's going up. But again, if I'm looking at this, one, as was said, I don't know that sorghum got moved there, and 2, then that's kind of somewhat false in that it's going up, but now there's more stuff in it, so I might expect that it was, once I know that, I might expect it to be going up. The other question would be, when you mention those larger funds, that things have been moved into, well, I also know, is the agency, is anything reflected there that this then displaces something else that the agency had funding for?
Well, particularly with State Water Plan Fund, that is difficult to show. And let me talk about that a little bit in line 142. Okay, so you see line 142, that's delete State Water Plan Fund appropriations. So you see a negative $28.4 million there. And, agencies do what they want to do. But basically, they changed it from the traditional lines of appropriation, which you would specify, equus bids and re-injections and dredging and each different project, into having 5 specific buckets, okay? And those buckets would be like water resiliency and water conservation and, so certain types of crop investments. And so that's the way they did instead. But it was difficult on the House side for them to identify what was in each one of those buckets. And certain projects would actually appear in multiple buckets. Okay, so as a result, trying to draw a direct line from what the agency requested in those buckets and what is currently funded isn't truly feasible, okay, because it's funded in a different mechanism. So instead of seeing 5 major sort of areas of appropriation, you see each different project or area that's being appropriated, and that's the way it's reflected in the appropriations bill. So each one of these items that you're seeing here on the State Water Plan Fund get their individual water plan fund appropriation inside the bill with specifications on how to spend those funds. I know that sounds kind of wrapped up in this issue. Maybe I should have chosen something other than agriculture as an example, but I'm glad that you get to see how complicated sort of tracking some of these expenditures are.
Other questions? Seeing none, please proceed.
All right, thank you very much. So I am going to talk a little bit from the House shorthand, and honestly, I'm going to let y'all, your desires guide me on this particular point. I've been doing these weekly and sort of giving you an overview of where we are. I can start over and start at page 1 and walk all the way through all the major adjustments, or I could just stand for questions or point out a couple of last minute adjustments if you want, however you prefer.
How long do you think it'd take you to go through the whole sheet?
About 10 minutes, 15 minutes to go through the whole thing.
Why don't you just go through the whole thing?
That's good.
Means we have a lot of new people.
So starting on page 1, and I will phone a friend in case we get too deep in the details here. If we start on general government, in FY 2025, you have a $7 million ad of SGF for safe and secure firearm detection. This is primarily aimed at public entities and accredited non-public schools, so it's really schools is where this money is targeted towards. You also see that same $7 million ad in 26, and I think you see a $5 million ad in the Attorney General for FY 2027. And this is an ad in the Attorney General's office, and it's a reduction in the Safe and Secure Schools grant for K-12 education as well. And so that's added. Moving to page 2, and I'm just going to hit the high points here. Stop me at any point if you have questions. Yeah, so there's that $6 million ad. It's $6 million, not $5 million ad you have in 27 for that same item. I don't think there's anything on page 3 I need to talk about. If you turn to page 4, I'm going to start kind of in the middle of the page, Department of Administration. So you have a $7 million restoration of the reappropriation. You might remember that the LBC committee lapsed a bunch of the SGF reappropriations, and one of the agencies just sort of come back and ask for them. I think Shirley talked about reappropriations. That's when you don't expend money in one year and it carries over into the following year. I think after everything was said and done, about $70 million in reappropriations were lapsed between what was originally lapsed in 2007 and what was restored. So this restores the funding for that licensing portal. That was a legislative initiative to centralize licensing verification. You also have the add back of $520,000 for the Division of Budget and $500,000 in a reappropriations lapse for the Security for Jewish Centers of Faith. This also added language that says if this money doesn't get expended in this current year, it won't continue to carry forward. And then there was also some additional funding added regarding funding the Docking State office building from ARPA interest funds. There's roughly $47 million in ARPA interest funds inside of this budget. So that is basically interest that's being accrued on the balance we continue to carry on those federal funds. Normally, when you carry interest on a federal fund, it has to be expended for the purpose that it was originally, that federal grant was provided for. ARPA is different. You have a lot more freedom for how you spend that. So what this does is throughout this, you'll see that ARPA State Relief Fund, and in most cases, that's ARPA interest that you're seeing there. Turn to the next page. Under Department of Commerce, in the middle of the page, you have a $5.8 million ad for the Bombardier Defense Project. And 26, you have a $2 million ad for Level Up Kansas. And then these all other funds, almost all of this is EDIF and some ARPA interest adjustments that are happening in. And it would probably be good when you're reviewing the commerce budget to go ahead and pull that EDIF table and sort of just walk through those line by line to get where you need to be at. If you want to turn to page 7. In Judiciary, there's a $2.1 million ad to restore base budget expenditures for salaries and wages for non-judge personnel, and a $1.1 million ad for IT and security inside of the judicial branch. The $2.1 million ad is really just their base and fringe increases that they're experiencing inside the judicial branch for the non-judges, and so that's what was restored. All right, turning to page 8. So in the legislature's budget, there's a $3 million ad, and this just reduced the size of the reappropriations lapse. So House Bill 2007 basically took the entire reappropriation from the legislature. The House recommended restoring a portion of that. It was about a $7 million lapse and about a $3 million restoration. Under the FY 2026, there is an addition of $1 million SGF to use artificial intelligence to analyze state government expenditures. And there's a deletion of $500,000 SGF to reduce other professional fees. And this was just sort of a little bit of a haircut to the legislature's budget that was recommended by the House. Turning to page 9. And this is in the Office of the Governor. So in domestic violence prevention grants, you have the addition of $1 million SGF for that, and you have the addition of $344,845 for child advocacy center grants. There is a variety of SGF grants that flow through the Office of the Governor. There's just a couple of enhancements that were recommended. For the CACs, that is the amount, so it'll keep them flat between fiscal years if you include their reappropriations. Turning to page 10, we'll start with KDADS. So there's a $29.3 million SGF add to add an additional $20 per day for the number, based upon the number of Medicaid residents at a nursing facility. There's an $8.7 million add for IDD waiver slots to bring that, to add 320 slots to that. There's a $6 million add for community and mental health center grants. There's a $4.8 million add for a nursing facility rebase, so changing the rates. There's a $2 million add for behavioral health training related to substance abuse. There's a, nope, next one is substance abuse. This previous one is addiction, psychiatry, and child and adolescent psychiatry fellowships, excuse me. The $1.8 million add for substance abuse development, workforce development. $1.7 million add for specialized medical care rate, that's the TA and IDD waivers. $1.6 million for some problematic sexual behavior and cognitive behavioral therapy programs. $1.5 million SGF add for behavioral health add-on for nursing facilities, and a $1 million add for NSIP, or Nutrition Services Incentive Program, and that's kind of Meals on Wheels stuff that's going on there. Turning to page 11, the one I wanted to sort of touch on was the very last one. This is still in KDADS. That's in line 22, and that's telehealth services for students. This deletes $2 million from the MHIT, our mental health intervention teams, and KDADS, and adds it back for this telehealth services serving the same population, but through a telehealth means. All right, and I will go ahead and turn to page 13. And you feel free to stop me at any point if someone has questions, or we can come back at the end, whatever your preference is. So this is KDHE Health. So you have in the middle of the page under 26, you have a $10 million add for adult inpatient behavioral health with specifications on how those funds are going to be distributed. There's a $4 million add for enhanced dental rates. There's a $1 million add for enhanced pediatric rates, and about $800,000 also for pediatric dental, or for dentistry dental codes increases as well. So that's about a $1.7, $1.8 million add for dental rates that are combined in there. Turning to page 15. This is, I'm going to go to the middle of the page. There's $30 million added for Larned State Hospital for contract nursing. And there's language added in 27 to prohibit Larned State Hospital from using contract nursing. And in Osawatomie State Hospital, you see an $8 million add in 25 and 26 for contract nursing as well. So that's $16 million over 2 years. There is no additional contract nursing funding in Larned for FY 2026. So the amount that's still in their base is there, but no add. Turning to page 16. So we'll start with sort of, I'm going to call this regions higher education, but most of this is sort of community and technical college ads. So this is like $14.3 million for 2-year college apprenticeships, $10.5 million for 10 student success initiatives, $7 million for tech colleges operating grants, $5.8 million in NIST playbook. This is the portion of NIST playbook that is in the regents. There's a $5 million ad for community college capital outlay at 2-year colleges. There's a $4 million ad for tiered tech ed. There's a $3.9 million ad for tuition for technical education, $3.3 for Washburn operating grant, $1 million added for osteopathic scholarships. There's a $2 million deletion or add from ARPA funds for Blueprint for Literacy. That was part of an original $10 million ask. If you turn to page 17 in line 13, item 13, there's a deletion of $32.7 million from, it says from the SGF, it's really from special revenue funds that are funded by an SGF transfer for the Campus Restoration Act. And that was the ongoing program which added money for demolition and rehabilitation and repair at the Board of Regents. Looking down under Department of Education, in FY 2026, in item 1, you have the addition of $10 million for special education aid. Coming out of committee, that was $30 million. They went back and forth. They ended up at $10 million is where they ended up at. Turning to page 19. And this is where I'm talking about some of the complexity around EDIF. So under K-State ESARP, in that KSU 105 and 26, you have the addition of $3.5 million EDIF to the Cooperative Extension Program for KSU 105. So they're recommending funding portions of that KSU 105 from EDIF here. And if you could turn to page 21. There's under Wichita State University, there's a $4.5 million ad for aviation research. All right, turning to page 22. So under Department of Corrections, you have adding back partially the reappropriations lapse of $28.2 million. That's for that evidence-based juvenile programs fund. This does not fully restore the lapse inside of that program. It leaves about $10 million lapsed in the evidence-based juvenile programs fund. And there's a $10 million add from the restoration of a lapse of a reappropriation for this Lansing Correctional Facility career campus as well. The rest of this under Department of Corrections is really just ongoing costs of funding the food service contract and funding their medical contract. So at the risk of, just a moment. Okay, turn all the way to page 28. Under Kansas State Fair there, you have the addition of $750,000 from the ARPA interest for a new command center at the Kansas State Fair. The actual cost of that is going to be about 2 to 3 times that cost, with the expectations of the funding for that coming from the locals to complete construction of that emergency command center. And if you could turn to page 30. So these are statewide adjustments. So these are going to affect most agencies in state government. So you have the deletion of vacant positions. You have a deletion of 11.1 million SGF to eliminate funding for vacant positions in state government. So this calculation does exclude the Department of Corrections and state hospitals from that amount as well. So that is excluded from that number. The estimate for this does offset for shrinkage. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds of budgets, but essentially there is a large quantity of a negative salary adjustment that's built into agency budgets. So this calculation comes up with a total number of assumed vacant positions and then backs out of that number the amount that they have for negative salary adjustment dollars that are inside of their budget. Turning to page 31. You have an SGF lapse of $34.5 million to make a 1.5% across the board state operations reduction. State operations would exclude aid to locals and other assistance. So that means that it would exclude funding for schools. So the money that's going out to K-12 school districts would be excluded. It also excludes the state schools for the blind and deaf. And it also excludes debt service as well, is excluded from that. There is a state employee pay plan in here, and that adds 38.1, including $91.8 million all funds. This is structured so that people who are making less than 10% under market or more than 10% under market are brought to 10% below market. Anybody between negative 10% and positive 10% gets a 2.5% adjustment, and anybody who's 10% over market gets a 1% adjustment. It uses the standard exclusions, which we've been using for years now, which means that if you're on a standardized career progression plan, you are excluded. State elected officials are excluded, that's, judges are also excluded as well because they have their own sort of pay plan that's going on. With that, I would stand for questions. There is 2 adjustments you will not see here. There's a small adjustment to the state fire marshal. $500,000 was pulled out of the judicial branch and put into the state fire marshal for firefighting equipment, going to local firefighters. That was a floor amendment. that was adopted. There is also a $1 million lapse to commerce in here where it takes that money and puts it in the State Finance Council and says that they can have that money back if they go ahead and comply. That's adjusted out of here as well. And with that, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Dylan. Senator Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the indulgence. Dylan, can you tell me in House Bill 2007, how many new full-time employees were added? And possibly the associated expenditures with that.
So if you turn to the very last page on page 31, there is 64 FTE positions. So that, you see the box at the bottom? That basically just sums up the total amount of the adjustments. And there's 64 additional new FTEs added in '25, and there's 127 new FTEs added in FY 2026. To get you the exact number on the cost, I'll have to do some calculations. We can do that for you. And there's also going to be a combination in there of straight salary costs and also some capital outlay and commodities costs to basically get them a phone and stuff like that.
Thank you for that. That'll be a fun discussion for later, Mr. Chair.
Senator Petty.
So Dylan, this is kind of semantics, but I was a little bit confused by words enhancement or restored. So so when you use the word enhancement, what did you mean with that? I'm a little bit confused.
Certainly. So enhancement does have a specific meaning inside of state budgeting, at least in the state of Kansas. So an enhancement is an increase, not in the current year, but in the budget year, okay? So in this case, in FY 2026, that is a new activity. So it's, if your budget goes up because your keepers costs go up, that is not an enhancement. All right, that's just, part of your base, it's rolling forward. But if you want to add a new person to do a new project, that is considered to be an enhancement. And under the budget instructions coming from the Division of Budget and the Office of the Governor, they should be broken out and treated separately.
And then restored.
So in some cases you have, particularly on the lapses, you have restore language used because that was largely around reappropriations. So the 2007 bill lapsed a bunch of those, and in a lot of cases what we just talked about is restoring that previously approved authority. So if it was previously approved, we often use the restore language as opposed to add language. So if you're talking about a SGF lapse for the legislature, $4 million, they restored $3 million of that previously approved expenditure authority.
So just as a follow-up, so then a lot of the things that we actually are seeing here are restored.
That's correct, particularly in '25. You don't see nearly as much of that in FY 2026. But if you look in '25, you see a lot of restorations because that was previously approved authority. That was deleted by the Legislative Budget Committee, but after consideration in the House, they said, no, we really do believe you need to make this expenditure. And so we talked about restoration. That way we wanted to sort of distinguish between, straight adds, and things that were just like restorations of a previous authority.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you were going through this information in your, quote, 10 minutes,
Could have gone faster.
I did have a question that is not in the information here. How much ARPA money is the state still holding that's unencumbered? I thought that was given to the states to fill or do certain things.
So there is almost no ARPA funds that are unencumbered. The only ARPA funds, straight ARPA funds that are unencumbered at this point is if there was a previous encumbrance for that fund for a previous project and they didn't end up spending it all and it lapsed back to the fund. And most of that has already been gone back out for similar purposes. The money that the $48 million you're seeing here is ARPA interest. So that means that you're just drawing interest on that existing ARPA fund. The rest of it has already been committed and is out there.
So the interest is on encumbered ARPA funds, correct?
It is, but since those dollars haven't actually gone out the door, so they're still sitting in state coffers, we continue to draw interest until those grants get made. In most cases, those grants that have not gone out, it's just because that entity has not met the requirements to draw those funds down, particularly when you see like matching requirements.
Now, I saw at least a couple times there are some indications, I'm talking about the salmon colored, that state money is provided to draw down federal money. Now, with the Doge at the federal level, we don't know what may or may not be put out there. So I'm not even sure how to ask this, but we could put some state dollars in to draw down federal dollars that are never available. Do you know, is there a process to say, okay, there was no federal money, so the state money goes back to SGF or to the fund that it was appropriated from?
Mr. Chairman, so the majority of those cases that you're seeing there where that's going to happen, that goes to a separate SGF appropriation, so the authority to expend that is only for that particular purpose. A good example is the sort of Build Kansas program, where Build Kansas money is being put up to draw down federal grants. All right, but if that federal grant doesn't come through, that expenditure authority does not occur. And so it's dependent upon that. In caseloads, it's a little bit different if you look at like some of the HCBS and FMAP adjustments, because that is commingled. And we'll have to examine that in the caseloads process. But that's a very special case, and that's pretty much only there.
So then the money would stay in the fund that it was appropriated out of if it is not expended because there's no federal money?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to follow up along those lines, the ARPA interest money, are there requirements on what the interest has to be spent on?
So my most recent guidance is that there is no direct restrictions on when that money can be used and how it can be used. Unless pretty much there's not. But I would defer actually on this one because it's a matter of legal to the revisor's office on this particular point.
David, would you like to take that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I believe I think that is the latest guidance on that interest earnings, is that it's not subject to some of the, like you might see in a typical federal program, where it has to be used for that program. It's more open-ended than most federal spending, yes.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up, so I have an amount here of about approximately $68 million in ARPA interest. If we take out the Dole State building completion, that leaves $48 million. Is there any left?
Well, so that's the sort of challenge with the interest dollars, is that it continues to accrue on a daily basis. So it's not like an account where, well, I say really it accrues on a monthly basis. That's when the transfer is made. So it's accruing at a rate currently of about $2 million per month, roughly. But I mean, the rate of accrual, it varies dramatically based upon the status of the treasury ladders. And I don't want to get too deep into PMIB politics, but the way that's structured, the amount of money that goes in any particular month will change. But it is accruing at, several $1 million per month is continuing to go into that fund. And if interest rates go down, that number goes down.
Other questions? Seeing none. Dylan, on our FMAP, how does that look? Are we up, down, or what's?
It is down, and a lot of the increases in the human services caseloads are reflective of that coming back to the base on FMAP. But I would look to Megan, who's already getting ready to talk to you all about what the status is on FMAP.
That'd be great.
All right.
Thank you, Dylan. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a question, but I would just draw the committee's attention. I'm sure everyone has seen it, the white sheet, the House Bill 2007 overview. When you look over the last 8 years since 2019, the legislature has increased spending 50%. Same way in the state general fund, and this is something Mr. Deere, I think, had mentioned, that's what got my attention. We have been spending at an average annual increase of $442 million increased spending on state general fund and over $1 billion annual increase in all funds. And Mr. Chairman, we cannot continue down this road, and I know probably everyone knows that, but I thought that it should at least be stated out loud that the legislature spending is out of control. Those are my words, not anyone else in the rooms potentially, but when I ran the numbers and saw it's a 50% increase in spending on both of these funds and significant annual increases, Mr. Chairman, we're just spending and spending and spending, and all of this, I don't care if it's federal money or state money, is taxpayer money. Whether it's tax dollars or fee funds, it comes from taxpayers. And again, I just thought that I would go on the record to mention this, and as chair of a committee that's going to be looking at some budgets, I'm going to try to assist in the process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dylan?
Nope.
No question there? More of a statement. Senator Petty?
So I guess I would ask, and we've gone, provided this going back to 19, but if we went back to 13 and worked from there, we would see that we had strangled many of our agencies to the point that we had to reinvest in order to provide the services that are necessary. So I guess we could ask for that. I mean, I could ask for that, showing the same profile back to 2013.
Mr. Chairman, certainly if you would like a 20-year run on SGF and all funds expenditures, we can do that for you.
Any other questions for Dylan? Seeing none?
Megan?
Pardon me? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The FMAP between 25 and fiscal year 26, the state share increased by about 0.68%, and that's about 30.4 million. And that's the amount that was reflected through that change in the caseloads. And that is the majority of the spending that's impacted by the FMAP.
So we're spending 34 million more this year than last year.
30 million more in fiscal year 26 than fiscal year
26,
25.
right.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions for Megan? Oh, Senator Petty?
So Megan, when Dylan went through I think it was the salmon colored sheets, went through the social service budgets and mentioned about the funding. I'm not getting back to there quick enough, but so when the IDD waivers, that is reducing the waiting list, isn't it? Are we reducing, did they at House put in to reduce it by 320? Did that stay in here?
That's correct. There's a reduction of 320 in fiscal year 26.
And so that's reflected in this profile.
Yes, it's reflected in there, and it's in House Bill 2007.
Any other questions for Megan? Seeing none, thank you, Megan. Dylan, did you have anything else?
Mr. Chairman, no, I think that about covers it. You've probably heard from me for long enough. But we are all available. If, when reviewing these documents, you have any questions, reach out to us, reach out to me specifically, and I'll probably have you talk to somebody else as more of an expert, and we're more than willing to assist.
Thank you, Dylan. Committee, a couple of announcements. Next week, we will meet on Monday and on Friday. We have a limited number of days to get through this budget. And some of those days, we may work long. We may have to go through lunch hour. So everybody kind of plan for that. And we will plan to hear the agency budgets, and then we'll take a few minutes at the beginning of the following meeting, or maybe sometimes it might not be the next day, but to go ahead and do our recommendations. I suggested everyone, you're getting plenty of information here, and it's overwhelming, really. So just go through it and mark what questions you have. Particularly, this one sheet is designed to let you know what the House did put in, what maybe the agencies asked and they didn't put in. So, because I'm sure you've probably all had a few visitors to your office already, and if you haven't, plan on visiting with a lot of folks, because if there was a change made in the House, they may come and ask you to, or give you information on why or why not. So it's important. Also, each budget hearing will have an overview by the appropriate KLRD fiscal analysis, followed by a presentation from the agency. And due to our short time, we're really limited on public testimony, and it'll only be in writing. So I'm telling everyone to present theirs in writing, because basically next week when we get started, we'll have 7 days, and then we'll have part of the following week. So we're down to limited number of days, because we'll need to get this out by the 13th. And I'd like to thank the chairs on this committee that are going to do different budgets for us. So Senator Erickson will do education, and Senator Fagg's going to do some social service and the KCC. Senator Peck's going to do agriculture, and Senator Alley is going to do commerce. And I need to visit with Senator Peterson. May have him do a little on the transportation if he has time. If not, we'll do that in this committee. Social services we'll do in this committee. And we will do higher ed, and we will do corrections, and probably some other things that come before us. So kind of plan your schedules accordingly. And on Fridays and Mondays, we may try to, like on Fridays, try to start like at 8:30 in the morning, and that way we could go a ways, and then especially on the pro forma day. So anyway, that's the plan. Anyone have any questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on, for example, on social service budget, we are going to just have KDHE make a presentation and DCF make a presentation. And then if there anything else will be provided to us in writing only, no.
As far as testimony, yes, we're not going to have time for, just number of days were limited. We had to wait, and till today to get started. So we're going to have to do a lot in a short period of time.
So I'm just going to lay this out here now. I know we won't talk about it, but so this is a different process than we've used in the past, and I'm personally not sure I think it's the most productive process. But so I would like for us to think about as we go through this, whether we have to follow this kind of process, even though we are using not the governor's budget, but the legislature's budget. It seems like it could be, I'm not sure I understand necessarily why it has to just be a budget that comes to us from the House, because I do believe that the Senate should be as invested in decisions that are made about this budget as the House is. So I'm just saying this for the future, for next year, since we'll all be back here, that we might think about using the process that we've used in the past, where we looked at the budget at the same time that the House was looking at the budget, and then proceeded in that way. So I'm just laying that out there.
Well, this is the way we're doing it, so thank you. Well, and probably for the next 4 years, I'm assuming. So any other questions? Seeing none, committee, we're adjourned.